This is a global impression comment that I have for all of you who, after I've done my grading for the external assessment, might benefit from some general observations that I had from your papers after I've looked at them. Because we're not meeting on Monday, I'm giving you some time to complete your internal assessments, and then on Tuesday through Friday, you guys have signed up. Each team has taken a different day, and will be completing your internal assessment rough drafts for me. I'll be giving you specific comments and grading to kind of help refine that process too. I'm hoping you've worked hard on that. Regarding your external assessments, you guys are much farther along than most of my classes in the past. So I commend you for that. There's a lot of good detail for me to analyze and to think about as I try and help you guys refine this process toward the end of the semester. You will have several months after, technically, several months after the semester ends to make this something that you need it to be. In terms of your IB diploma, all those nights that you've stayed up late and all the mornings that we've gotten up early together to complete, hopefully will be validated in this essay. Because if you don't spend that kind of time, then all that extra support in high school that you've put into this process of getting an IB diploma won't come out how you want it to. So let's keep focused on that. Some general observations. Number one, most of you have chosen this particular prescribed title that I have in front of you using Cassandra's paper. I won't be looking at any comments or grading at all. I'm just using the prescribed titles as I see them. Knowledge within a discipline develops according to the principles of natural selection. How useful is this metaphor? So that was about 90% of you completed this particular prescribed title. So I'm wondering how many of you are working together. Obviously, I guess I just need to say it as a disclaimer because I didn't see it specifically, but I don't know how many of you might be colluding towards a finished product. Very important that you keep originality your key, I guess, number one issue that you want to maintain. You will be submitting this to turnitin.com. It will be giving you an E-grader report as well as an originality report, and there's no tolerance for any type of plagiarism. So please make sure that this is all 100% your work and that you are citing things correctly so that we can identify where you are potentially plagiarizing or where you're just forgetting to cite, or that you are citing people correctly. So 90% of you are doing this one. Knowledge within a discipline develops according to the principles of natural selection. How useful is this metaphor? First, you have to know what natural selection is. Many of you are using maybe your own thoughts on what natural selection is. You've maybe heard the term before. You've studied it a little bit in biology. Many of you are using the term just incorrectly. The idea of it is not how you're applying it. So be very careful how you're applying the metaphor correctly using the principles of natural selection. And that keyword principles is important as well to avoid what we call personification fallacies. If you remember, we talked about that in the natural sciences. Oftentimes our textbooks make inanimate objects have feelings and have motivations that don't actually exist. Personification fallacy. So avoid that in your writing. A lot of you talk about natural selection as if it were a thing, and knowledge as if it were a thing that has motives, and then it chooses the best out of all the things that are available. One of the areas or strains of research you might want to consider is Dr. Michael Roos talking about the changes over time with evolution. Also looking at YouTube videos. There's a lot of them that have to do with dispelling some myths about natural selection, particularly in the creation versus evolution debate. It would be good for you to have a good working knowledge and vocabulary, technical vocabulary about the nature of natural selection, external pressures, genetic drift, those kinds of things. Because if you're gonna analyze the metaphor, you need to know what the metaphor is connecting to, the biological idea of natural selection and how it relates to Darwinian evolution. So That's like the main thing that I notice with all your papers is a lot of you are just not understanding what natural selection means. I would say 85 to 90% of you are talking about natural selection as getting better, like it's always getting superior, and so the knowledge is always getting superior as well. It's getting better and better and better, more complex, more precise, more and greater. Notice the other term here, how useful is this metaphor? So then the key word again is useful, right? So principles, natural selection, and useful. Remember we talked about pragmatic truth theories. You want to start connecting it to TOK concepts. So in what way does natural selection connect to 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 TOK concepts that we've studied in the chapters, in our notes, in our TOK web, in your mesh posts, so that you are actually giving me concrete details that also connect to TOK concepts. And this leads me to my second advice for this prescribed title, which is your thesis statement. Many of your thesis statements do not give me an argument. They just describe in general what you think natural selection is, and then you connect it descriptively to some knowledge areas. But you don't give me an argument about the extent, how it works, the diverse knowers' perspectives that are so important to the rubric scoring of this essay. So you need to incorporate other people's perspectives, your own concept or your argument that you're going to describe, and then connecting it to TOK ideas and concepts as you summarize it. You seek to summarize your entire essay and its argumentation in 1 or 2 sentences. So that's really what your intro paragraph should be focused on. Some other quick ideas regarding this particular prescribed title. Many of you are using a very rigid definition of mathematics. And so when I see all of you guys, a lot of you are talking, I would say again about 80 to 90% of you, most of the people who are writing this, you're using mathematics, the entire area of knowing, as a counterclaim to knowledge within a discipline develops according to the principles of natural selection. So you're literally taking all the areas of knowing and saying, these are the areas of knowing that connect to natural selection. Here's the areas of knowing that don't. Well, does that sound like an overgeneralization? Because it sounds like that to me. So really focus on the extent to which. Make sure you're qualifying the language you use, what principles are at work that are like this but are not within 2 or 3 different areas of knowing, that you're actually giving me a good overview of the different perspectives involved with it. Who says that natural selection is connected to ethics? How is ethics and natural selection connected? How are they not as connected? In what ways are they not? In the same way also then, going back to my comment about mathematics, or I should say your guys' rigid definition of mathematics, in what ways is mathematics also kind of flowing in this way of natural selection, and in what ways is it not? Many of you are just taking mathematics, lumping it as an entire concept, again with its own personification fallacy, its own desires and wants, and mathematics is this thing and it wants to be this thing, and turning it into this rigid, it's always been that way since Pythagoras kind of system. And a lot of you are referencing Pythagoras as if he was the only person to develop axioms, and I think we talked about that quite at length in our chapters, in our discussions as well, about how mathematics has changed over time, how it has evolved and is refined as a result of the principles at work with newer mathematicians, how they build off knowledge. And that's something that you need to think about. Again, how do we acquire knowledge? Maybe that's an area of research you can do, knowledge acquisition. How is knowledge acquired? In what way, what external pressures, okay, that's a key word there for natural selection, exist within this process. Also, so when we look at natural selection, then that's the major thing connected to mathematics that you have to remember, that mathematics is not this rigid area of knowing that you think it is. So now I'm going to turn my attention to the second prescribed title, In Gaining Knowledge, Each Area of Knowledge Uses a Network of Ways of Knowing. Discuss this statement with reference to 2 areas of knowledge. Only about 10% of you have done this one, so I'm just going to spend really quick time, just a very small amount of time on this particular one. Luis is one of the few that have chosen this one. The key word will be network, and so we want to make sure that our concrete details are connected to how it is that either neurologically or other kinds of concrete details we have, how the ways of knowing interact simultaneously. And that if I'm going to reference a detail like intuition or religion or emotion, like faith language or emotion language versus reasoning language, that I'm using them fully and I'm actually describing them fully, not just name dropping here and there, full citations, a full treatment of the different ways in which these ways of knowing interact. Again, also your thesis statement will be very important. How do I view my answer to this prescribed title? How am I looking at different perspectives, not just one versus the other, but maybe in 3 or 4 different equal ways? And how am I referencing this to 2 areas of knowing with a full treatment of TOK concepts? So again, identifying your TOK concepts, your areas of knowing, your perspectives on it, and then your perspective on it. I think it might be a good thought process for really anyone who's doing a prescribed title. So that can apply to both. All right. And the same thing applies again. If you're using an area of knowing that you think sounds like I'm overgeneralizing, it probably means that you are, particularly with mathematics. A lot of you are using that rigidly when it needs to be something you maybe research and realize, if I've made a statement that sounds too simplistic, it probably actually is. So please look at that a little bit further, those areas. Go over this video again and slow it down, stop it a little bit, write a little word web, whatever you need in order to get the information that you need to actually make your papers a little bit more refined. So a lot of them still need quite a bit of improvement. Some of you haven't started, and so I'd encourage you to use these global analysis from other people's papers to involve with yours and how you might use it. I guess to quickly summarize, just so that we're clear, and you can reference this again. Number 1, know what the terms mean in the prescribed title. How are you going to move forward with your research so that you understand fully when it talks about networks or when it talks about natural selection? Number 2, your thesis statements need to incorporate first the required areas of knowing, or choose areas of knowing that you're going to talk about. Go into a summary of the depth, the very specific elements you're pulling out, but then also connect those to TOK concepts, diverse knowers' perspectives, and finally your own perspective, which should be your argument that ties the whole thing together. What is your argument when you answer this prescribed title? And number 3, that your concrete details are correct and that they again apply back and they analyze back to your answering of the prescribed title, back to your thesis. How does it relate to your thesis? Think about your overall organization that you should have started with, and making sure that you're analyzing. You're not just describing. Okay, so research needs to be accurate, and you need to make sure that you're using those TOK concepts from our past lessons. Okay, and that's it. So again, this is in substitute for Monday, and that way you guys can take this and apply it to your revisions. And I look forward to much stronger papers the next time I grade them when I do so for finals. Work on your internal assessment as well. Those grades will be coming this week, and you'll have a week to revise before I expect really excellent and strong and teacherly essays and presentations. So, all right, and I'll talk more about the internal assessments starting on Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.